Good morning. Happy Friday. Wow, the school year is so close to being over. Unbelievable. These last few weeks, about 6, 7 weeks, have quite been interesting. Um, so this is your last day for this week, and next week is your last week altogether for learning new material. So, what's your objective today? I will create a one-pager to demonstrate my knowledge of life of the people during the Civil War. Okay, let's do a quick review from yesterday. So, review from yesterday, we'll start with the war in the East. It makes sense that most of the Civil War was going to be fought in the Southeast because that's where most of the Confederate soldiers were, and that's where the Confederacy was. Okay, Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson had a really big spree towards the beginning of it where they did really well. They actually had 4 major wins in a short period of time. So they won 7 Days Battle, they won at Fredericksburg, the Second Battle of Bull Run, and then Chancellorsville, Virginia. Okay, all of these, and it kind of shocked President Lincoln that we had all these losses so quickly. You know, we had more industry, we had more people. How are we losing? They had such a smaller amount of army than we did. But yeah, we're losing. It was not a good point in the Civil War for Lincoln. Okay, so then Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, said, "Hey, Robert E. Lee, I think you should attack instead of just playing defense in the South. Why don't you attack in Maryland?" So he did. So what his first idea was, well, I'm going to break up my troops into 4 and I'm going to move them around and then attack from 4 sides. Well, the problem with that was his plans got lost. The orders or the plans for this attack were on paper, given to one of his officers. They dropped out, some dropped out of the ground. The Union Army found them and found out what was going to happen. And so had George McClellan, who was the was like the head general for the Union, had he attacked right away, Lee would have been in big trouble. But he waited 2 days, which is McClellan's problem. He never attacked. He never did. He wasn't decisive. So for 2 days, the plans were out there. He didn't attack, and it gave Lee time to reinforce and get the troops together to attack. And then when the battle happened, it ended up being the deadliest, bloodiest day of American history. Not just in the Civil War, but literally the bloodiest day in U.S. history. There were 23,000 casualties that day. We had 23,000, there was 6,000 dead and 17,000 wounded. And it was the Battle of Antietam. Okay. And the Union actually won it, but it was bloody and horrible. Okay. So then the South was trying to get France and Great Britain to help them because they needed money, they needed supplies. So they were reaching out to them. So Lincoln and the Union was like, hey, if we end slavery, then that would give them a reason not to back them because both Great Britain and France had banned slavery already at this point. And the people were not happy over there about the slavery in America. So Lincoln, remember I told you, he never planned on banning slavery. He said he didn't like it. He didn't want to go into the new territories, but he was never going to get rid of it in the South or anyplace else. And remember, if he does anything to ban slavery, the border states are going to leave. Because remember, those 4 border states all had slaves. So when he realized that he needed to do this to stop Great Britain and France from helping, he said, yeah, okay, we'll do it. But the problem is he can't ban slavery. He doesn't have it constitutionally able to do that. But because they were at war, he could take the enemy's property. And remember, the course under Dred Scott said all the slaves were property. They weren't people. So he used this to take their property, and he emancipated all the slaves, but only in rebel-held territory, only in the Confederate States. So the slaves still living in the border states, Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, Missouri, they were still slaves. So how did this help the United States? Well, one thing, Great Britain and France decided not to help the Confederates. And as the Union Army marched through Southern territory, they would read the Emancipation Proclamation on the plantations. And a lot of the slaves would just walk away. They're like, we're free, we don't have to be here. So it ended up working out really well. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed on September 22nd, 1862, but it did not take effect until January 1st of 1863. Okay, now today, you're going to read the whole section for section 3, chapter 17 today. And you're going to be making a one-pager. We haven't done those in a long time. So, life was not easy. It wasn't easy in the North, and it wasn't even easy in the South. But I will tell you, the South had it much harder because that's where the fighting was. And the South, remember, they only planted crops. They had very little industry. And so, most people worked on a farm. Well, guess what? Most of the men were gone. They're at war now. And so the women are having to take over to keep the farms going. And the fighting is going on in the middle of their fields. So as the Union and the Confederacy fight and have battles, there's dead bodies everywhere. They're blowing things up. They're cannonballing things. They're tearing up the crops, the fields. They're taking over. They're burning houses. They're taking them over and making people's plantation homes into hospitals, all kinds of stuff. And they're just taking their stuff, and they're taking their food, because you had to feed all of these armies. And so both sides were taking food from the Southern people, because that's where the fighting was. Okay, so not good for the South. Now, what's interesting at this time is women, because the men are all at war, end up having to take over jobs. So up in the North, women are taking over. They're working in factories. They're having to do all these jobs. They become school teachers. They do all these different jobs that they never really had as much opportunity to do. I mean, yeah, they were working in factories, but not at the same positions. And women, for the first time, were allowed to join and become nurses. One of Dorothea Dix, remember her? Miss helping the mentally ill and the prisoners of war. She's like, no, women should be able to help. And she got a bunch of women to go help and be nurses. One of the women that came out of this that ended up helping was Clara Barton. She helped wounded soldiers. And she's the one that starts the American Red Cross. So anyway, but that's how she got her start, was helping during the Civil War. Women, both sides, were nurses. Excuse me. Women were spies. Because remember, Washington, D.C. was right on the edge of Virginia. And a lot of the people that were living in Washington, D.C. were Southerners. And they were against the war. So there were a lot of spies in Washington, D.C. for the Confederacy. There were also spies for the Union. One of the people who was helping the United States, or the Union Army, was Harriet Tubman. Remember, she hated slavery. And so she was a spy and a scout, and she also helped bring some people out of the South to escape on the Underground Railroad at that time, too. Women were allowed to enlist in the Army, as we know, but hundreds, about 400 women actually, on both sides, between the two of the North and the South, went undercover, like Milan, and were in the war. Okay, Florida. Now, Florida was part of the Confederacy. But, yeah, there were a couple battles down here, but not much. And the reason was the Union going to go all the way to Florida to fight a battle? Probably not. That's why most of the fighting was up in Virginia, South Carolina, a little bit in North Carolina, Georgia. Not in the South, not all the way down south to Florida. But what Florida ended up doing is they became the ones that supplied the Confederacy. First of all, you need salt, because salt can be used to preserve food. So we started taking salt water, boiling it, and getting the salt out of it so they could salt the beef and keep the beef from going bad. We also, our number 2 industry in Florida is beef, is farming. So we had a lot of beef cattle back then. We still have a lot of cattle ranches today. We're only number 2 to Texas, by the way, for getting beef today. So anyway, so we were supplying vegetables, fruits, and a lot of the beef that was being used for the Confederate Army, and the salt to keep it from going bad. Now, once we have these battles going on, anytime you have a battle, there's going to be people that get taken as prisoners of war. The Confederacy had a place called Andersonville. It's in Georgia. And it was a small piece of land, and they had the number of about 10,000 that could live there. And there was a stream that went down the middle of Andersonville prison. And the men got their drinking water from it and stuff like that. Well, by the end, 33,000 people were living there. 33,000 prisoners of war were living in an area for 10,000. Now remember, there's no flushing toilets or anything like that. So they're going to the bathroom in latrines, which are outhouses. And the urine and the fecal material is getting into this little stream that they're drinking out of. A lot of people died. 13,000 people died there. Mostly from disease because of living too close quarters and drinking bad water, etc. It was not a good place. There were field hospitals. As you're reading about this, look at the picture on 475 and you'll see what barbaric means the field doctors were using during the Civil War. Doctors, surgeons would set up little hospitals outside the battlefields, and they would amputate arms and legs, because if you took a ball, remember these weren't bullets, these were lead balls. If a lead ball went into your body and they could remove it easily, then they would. But if they couldn't, then that lead poisoning and gangrene would set in, and then you would die. So they would literally take the saw that you can see on page 475, and they would saw off the arm or the leg, whatever. Now remember, they didn't have anesthesia. They didn't have these things to knock you out. So literally other men would grab your arms and legs and lay across you while they did these things to you. If you were lucky, they would give you a stick, or they would give you a little alcohol before they did it to try to get you drunk. But pretty much you were awake while they were sawing off your arm or your leg. It was really tragic and horrible. Okay, so what was going on politically at this time? In the North, remember we have the Democrats. So we have the Democrats that were for the war, and we had the Democrats that were against the war. They were the peace Democrats. The Republicans were the ones that started, they were the ones that with Lincoln and went to war. But there were still a lot of Democrats up there, but they were split between going to war and not going to war. And some of the peace Democrats actually were helping the South because they didn't think that we should go to war. Because there was so much opposition in what was going on, Lincoln and the Congress suspended habeas corpus, which means that they don't have to give you a trial right away. They can put you in jail without all of the probable cause and stuff that you normally have to have. And all that can all happen during times of war. The South did the same thing because they didn't need opposition within their own ranks. Draft. Oh my God. When they first started off, they're like, oh, people were excited. Millions of people in the North said, yes, we would serve. They had hundreds of thousands of men. In the South, again, people were so excited, even though there were so few men compared to the North, they still had a large army because the men were so excited about going off to war and fighting those, Union armies and getting our freedom. Okay. But after a while, people were like, hey, this war is going on and on and on. Remember, they thought it was going to be a quick war on both sides. It wasn't. 4 long years, bloody long years. So they started the draft on both the North and the South. But the problem was, in the South, you could just buy your way out of it. If you had money, you could just pay and not worry about it. It started off that if you were drafted, you were 18 to 35 were the draft years in the South. Then it went from 17 to 50. If you were in the South, you could hire a substitute. And later on, it was if you were a plantation owner with 20 or more slaves, you didn't have to. So you could see that if you were rich, you could pay somebody else. Or if you were really rich and you had over 20 slaves, you didn't have to go at all just because you were rich. Now, you could see why poor white people would not be happy about this, because they're the ones all going to war. And what are they really getting out of this? Not a lot. It's the plantation owners with all the slaves that are really going to benefit from the Confederacy breaking off. In the North, they have the same issues. You know, if you were rich and you had $300, you could pay the government $300 and you wouldn't have to go to war, or your son wouldn't have to go to war. Now remember, we have a lot of immigrants. We have a lot of people coming in, and $500 was like what you made for the whole year. Now, how many people, if you only made $500 for the whole year, could pay $300? Just the rich people. So again, the rich people up north weren't going to war either. And African Americans weren't allowed to go to war. So it was poor white people that were going to war and dying. They were not happy. And so they actually started having, they're called, there were riots. And there were draft riots. And in New York, it was really bloody. They ended up with having to call the military in, and they were, shooting. They were attacking government buildings. They were attacking African Americans because they felt it was their fault. By the end, after 4 days, more than 100 people were dead in New York from these draft riots. Okay, war in the economy. Some people up north made a lot of money from the war. If you owned a company that made ammunition, if you had a company that was making uniforms, if you were making weapons, ammunition, any of the wagons, stuff like that, you could make a lot of money because the government had to buy these things. But wars are expensive. So the government was having to borrow money. They were having to print more money. Not so good. In the South, it was just bad. The South wasn't getting products in. And remember, they imported almost everything because basically their whole livelihood was growing cotton, tobacco, indigo, all these products, and then they would ship them overseas or up north. Well, now they're blockaded. They can't ship anything. And because they weren't industrialized, they had very few industries there. They had to get everything shipped in from Great Britain, France, etc. But there's blockades. So the people in the South, they really suffer. And remember, all the fighting's going on. So their fields with food and stuff is being attacked and ruined. And we're taking in over their buildings and stuff like that. So there were food shortages. There were riots and stuff in Atlanta until it gets burned down. And they had really high inflation. The Confederacy, their money was new, etc. So they were just having problems. Okay. So this is Friday. You're doing your one-pager. Get everything submitted as fast as possible. Be done. You still have your test. If you have not taken your Chapter 16 test, you must do it by Sunday. If you have not taken your quiz for Chapter 17, Section 1, you need to do that by Sunday. Get all this stuff done. Enjoy your weekend. Try to get everything done by today. And turn it in, because some of you forget to turn stuff in. You get it all done, and then you forget. And then on Monday or Tuesday, you're like, I forgot. So turn it all in as soon as you're done. Hopefully you'll get everything done today. Turn it in, and then you'll be done for the weekend. And I will see you on Monday morning. Bye-bye.